The Lord said, "For the hurt of the daughter of my people I am hurt. I am mourning. Astonishment has taken hold of me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is there no recovery for the health of the daughter of my people?" This is Healing Balm. Today I want to talk to you about a subject that is difficult at its best, but it's easier to deal with it now. The effect of not dealing with it usually will have unintended consequences. You can devastate or ruin the life of somebody that you love very much that you never meant to hurt. Deathbed promises and the burdens they leave behind. A deathbed promise is rarely made under ordinary circumstances, and we all know that. It's spoken in a room heavy with fear or grief, love, emotions just going wild, and the knowledge that time is running out for that person. In that moment, the person being asked to promise may feel there's only one possible answer, and that is yes. Refusing can seem cruel, and hesitation can feel like betrayal. Yet the promise that comforts the dying may later become a burden for the living. Deathbed promises are often made in moments of love and urgency, but they can place an unfair moral weight on those that are left behind when the circumstances make the promise impossible, harmful, or emotionally unsustainable to fulfill. The emotional power of a final request comes from the fact that it almost feels sacred. It's like a sworn oath or a binding commitment. When someone's dying, their words seem to carry a deeper importance than they might have had at any other time that you've known them. A promise made at a bedside can feel like the last gift the living can offer to the dying. Whether the request is to keep the family together or protect a secret, we're going to talk about that one later. That's a heavy burden right there. To care for another person or continue on with a family tradition. The survivor may agree because they want to bring peace to somebody that they love. Calm the fears, doing everything they possibly can to make the transition easier, up to and including taking a burden on themselves that they cannot carry. In that moment, the promise is minus a practical decision. There's nothing practical about the decision that you're about to make, that promise you're about to make to that person. It's more an act of comfort for the dying. Because of this emotional pressure, the deathbed promises are not always freely chosen in the fullest sense. The person making the promise may be overwhelmed by grief or afraid of carrying regret after the death, and that's usually a real big possibility. Saying yes may seem like the only way to avoid pain to an already painful moment. Sometimes we have a hard enough time just getting through that moment, and we don't know what to do, what to say, and we speak without thinking. We're acting a lot of times out of love, and sometimes there's no answer. There's not a good answer. A promise made to soothe someone at the end of life may not take into account what life will actually demand afterward. The dying person may not be able to see the financial, the emotional, or the personal limits that the survivor will face once they're gone. After the death, the promise can begin to feel very different. What seemed like a loving commitment may become a source of exhaustion, conflict, guilt, really heavy guilt. A person who promised to care for a relative, a parent that was left, or a child that was left, may discover that the responsibility is too much to manage alone. Someone who promised to keep a family united may find that other family members refuse to cooperate. You don't have it within your power to force people to cooperate. A person who promised to protect a secret may realize that silence harms somebody else. In these situations, the survivor is trapped between honoring the dead and protecting the living. This conflict is painful because love alone does not make a promise possible. Love's not enough when it comes to deathbed promises and the burdens that it puts on the living. The living still have their own needs, responsibilities, and limits. They may have families of their own, health concerns of their own, financial problems of their own, or emotional wounds. Sometimes those wounds were inflicted by the dying. Not always, but sometimes they are. That makes the promise impossible sometimes to carry out exactly as it was spoken. When they fall short, they may feel as if they failed not only the promise, but also the person who died. It can bring a remorse that you can't even put into words. That's an unwarranted remorse, and that refers to feeling deep, agonizing guilt or self-blame for a situation where you're not actually at fault. You did not intend to cause harm or make an unnecessary mistake. You felt like you was doing the best you could do with a necessary, justifiable decision. It's an emotional response that is disproportionate or entirely undeserved. To have that feeling of remorse that's unwarranted is not fair to the living. The moral question is whether every deathbed promise should be treated as absolute. Promises matter because they reflect trust and loyalty, but the conditions under which they're made also matter. A promise made in fear or grief, desperation, is different from one that's made calmly with full knowledge of the future. We're talking deathbed here, running out of time. You make commitments before you even think because you don't have time to think. For that reason, breaking or changing a deathbed promise does not always mean betrayal. It don't mean that you backed off of what you committed to do. Sometimes it means recognizing that the promise, as originally stated, asks more than any person can reasonably give. One way to handle this burden is to separate the words of the promise from its deeper meaning. Honoring a promise does not always require fulfilling it literally. A person who promises to care for someone may honor that promise by finding safe, sustainable support rather than providing every form of care alone, single-handedly. Someone who promised to keep a memory alive, they may do it through stories, rituals, or acts of kindness instead of sacrificing their own future. You can't go with them. You can't lay your life down. That's not what they would have wanted you to do anyway. Reinterpreting the promise allows the living to act with both love and realism. This does not make the choice easy. I understand that. I've been there more times than I care to think about. Even when a survivor knows that a promise must change, guilt can remain. Sometimes you just cannot fulfill a promise you made in haste or because you didn't have time to think about it. The dead are no longer present to release the living from the obligation. So the survivor may feel judged by memory, just eating at them all the time, carrying a burden that they shouldn't be carrying. Loyalty to someone who has died should not require the destruction of the person who remains. If the promise was rooted in love, then its fulfillment should not demand endless suffering. True loyalty may involve preserving the intention behind the promise rather than obeying its exact terms at any cost. Deathbed promises reveal the complicated relationship between love, duty, and grief. They can offer comfort in a final moment, but they can also bind the living to responsibilities that no one fully understood at the time. The living should not dismiss such promises lightly, but neither should they be crushed by them. In the end, the most humane way to honor the dead may be to carry forward the spirit of the promise while accepting the limits of real life. The dead may ask for promises, but the living must still survive the weight of keeping them. A deathbed promise doesn't feel like an ordinary promise. It's not made across the kitchen table. It's not just everyday conversation. When there is time to think, question, or say no, it's made in a room where every word not only feels final, but some are literally final. And every silence feels heavy. I imagine that in such a moment and in times that I've had to deal with it myself, the person being asked to promise feels like there's only one possible answer, like I said a while ago, and that answer is yes. And you feel like if you refuse it, that you're being cruel. And to hesitate, like you're betraying. Yet the promise that brings comfort to someone who's dying can become a weight the living person has to carry long after that funeral is over. Deathbed promises are often made out of love, with full intentions of keeping every word of that promise. And in their heart, they do. But they can leave behind burdens that are harder, heavier, and more complicated than anyone understood at the time. Part of what makes the final request so powerful is that it feels sacred. When someone is close to death, their word, they seem to carry meaning heavier than any other time, any other conversation that you can recall. That's also one of the things that makes the promise so difficult. A person standing beside someone who's dying is not always able to think clearly, especially about the future, because none of us know what the future holds. We know what this minute holds right now. And we know, regardless of what we say or what we do, it's a painful moment that sometimes you don't feel like you're going to be able to live through it. But then, after you do, then you continue to relive it and relive it and relive it in your life. And that brings on a grief and a burden that just really shouldn't be there. Grief can make the answer come before the thought. Fear of regret can make yes feel automatic because you're afraid if you don't say yes, you're going to regret it. None of us want to live with regret. The living person may agree because they don't want to add pain to the moment, not because they've measured the cost of what's being asked. Later, when the house is quiet or the room's quiet and the immediate crisis has passed, the promise may begin to look different. What sounded simple in that final conversation may become complicated in real life for the rest of a life. Some people carry it all their life, that burden. This is where the burden begins. The person who made the promise still has to live inside the limits of ordinary life. They're not superhumans. They can't accomplish all the things that maybe they would love to accomplish and things that they may have spoken haste or spoken love. They may not have enough money, time, strength, or emotional support to do what they said they would do. A promise to care for someone may become too much for one person to manage by themselves. And a promise to hold that family together may fail because other people will not be held. You can't force a family to stay together. A promise to keep a secret may start to hurt someone who deserves the truth. Sometimes it's not up to you to tell them that truth. But there again, that's the next message we're going to be talking about. A promise to keep that secret may start to hurt someone who deserves the truth. And in those moments, the survivor is caught between two kinds of loyalty. Loyalty to the person who died and loyalty to the person who is still here, or the people who are still here. Especially if there's things that you're privy to know about the person that is dying. And if it's a situation with parents, for instance, you've got the one that's leaving and the one that's left. And you know about both of them. You know things about both their lives. And not things you can talk about sometimes. But look who's carrying the guilt of both. That person that's still here. What makes this especially painful is the guilt. Falling short of a deathbed promise can feel like failing the person themselves, like you let them down. The survivor may hear the promise again and again in their memory as if the dead were still asking for it. It's like you're hearing those words from the grave, even when there are good reasons for changing course. Guilt can make those reasons feel more like excuses. And I think that's one of the hardest parts. The person who asked for the promise is no longer there to understand, to forgive, or to release anybody from it. There's people that you've made maybe deathbed promises to that wouldn't have you tote that burden for the world. If they could take it away, they would. And that's why we need to think about that now, while we can still think. I know we can't always just plan for somebody's death, plan for a funeral. We know a lot of times when people become ill that they're nearing death's door and there's unfinished business. There's things that you would like to put off. We want to procrastinate. You're going to eventually deal with them because they're going to come back to that memory and you're going to keep dealing with them, wishing you had handled it beforehand. I think that is one of the hardest parts. The person who asks for the promise is no longer there to understand or release the person from the commitment. The living person has to make peace with this decision alone. Nobody else can make that peace for them or for you. Again, unintended consequences. That's what deathbed promises can bring. Still, I don't believe every deathbed promise should be treated as absolute. Promises matter, but so do the circumstances in which they're made. A promise made through tears, fear, and desperation is not the same as one that's made calmly with full knowledge of what the future will require, not just what it'll hold. Sometimes the person who says yes is saying it out of love, not to every impossible detail that may follow. You don't think that out. You don't know what does that commitment really mean. You're making that promise out of love. You didn't really understand what you was promising. If the promise later asks more than any person can reasonably give, Changing it does not necessarily mean that you are betraying the dead or betraying the person that you loved that's no longer with you. It may mean being honest about what the living can actually carry. Sometimes we just cannot carry it all. For that reason, the most compassionate answer may be to honor the meaning of the promise rather than the exact to-the-letter words. If someone promised to care for another person, maybe keeping that promise means finding help, making sure they're safe, loving them in a sustainable way, instead of doing everything for them. You can wind up making people dependent on you that was left. And that's not what the intentions of the deathbed promise was, to make that person that was left behind depend on you, take your life, rob you of any life. If someone promised to preserve a memory, maybe that can happen through stories, traditions, small acts of remembrance, rather than through self-sacrifice. You can't lay down your life for them. The heart of the promise may still be kept, even if the form of it has to change. This doesn't make the choice painless. Even a necessary change can feel like a betrayal at first. Grief has a way of turning memory into judgment and pointing its finger right back at you. And love can make duty feel endless. I also believe that someone who truly loved us would not want their final words to destroy the life that we still have to live. That's not what they wanted. If a promise was born out of love, then love should also allow room for human limits. The living should not be asked to prove loyalty by suffering forever. Deathbed promises reveal how complicated love can become after loss. They can comfort the dying, but they can also leave the living with responsibilities no one fully understood in the moment. I don't think such promises should be dismissed lightly, because they often come from the deepest places of love and fear. It is a commitment of the heart. You meant it when you made the promise. At that particular moment, you were willing to sacrifice your happiness to allow them to die in peace of mind and maybe give them one moment of happiness. Don't try to carry that undue burden and try to make it what it was not. Sometimes the truest way to honor the dead is not to obey every word exactly, but to carry forward the love behind the promise while still choosing to survive. That's what they would want, is to see you survive. The dead may ask for promises, but the living are the ones who must bear the weight of keeping them. And I know this has been a serious topic today, but life and death are serious. As hard as it is, we need to take that moment to reflect. If you're in a deathbed situation, you want to be there till that very last second and step outside that room. Step outside the stronghold that grief has on your thinking. Think clearly about the person that's leaving and their love for you that wouldn't have you burdened with that for the world. Separate that. And I look forward to being back with you on this next message. It's kind of similar, but a little bit different, and it's concerning the deathbed, but it's the confessions on the deathbed, the burden of the last words that can destroy the lives of those we love. You have to be careful what you confess. If you got some confessing to do, you need to do that before we're in a deathbed situation. Don't wait until the last minute to spring a lifetime secret, lifetime of regret, issues that people cannot cope with, deal with, or forgive you for. Don't save that for the last minute. Make sure that we do them right. Make sure we're just not feeding gossip. That's easy to do. Anyway, don't jump the gun on it. We are going to talk about these deathbed confessions, and I think it's going to be good for our souls to get some of this stuff off of us. Y'all be blessed and look forward to being back with you tomorrow.